There's a kind of power that grows in silence, the kind that doesn't ask to be seen. It's quiet, ruthless, the kind you don't post, don't share, don't explain. It's quiet, it's slow, but it builds something terrifying. It doesn't seek validation or applause, it just builds. Before the end of this video, you'll understand why being a loner isn't a flaw, it's a weapon. Centuries ago, there lived a man who did exactly that. His name was Miyamoto Musashi, Japan's undefeated swordsman. A man who understood how commanding himself in silence would make him command the world in chaos. The man who walked alone, fought over 60 duels, and never lost, not once. But that's not why we remember him. We remember him because after conquering every opponent, he turned inward. He realized the real war wasn't fought with steel, it was fought with silence. At 30, he withdrew from the world. No riches, no disciples, no applause. He vanished into solitude, and there he trained his mind like a blade, meditating and at war with own mind. When the world searched for him, he was already becoming something else, less man, more system. He called it Dokugodo, the path of aloneness, 21 principles that would govern his life after death. He wrote them not for followers, but for himself, a man's personal scripture of discipline. And each one was an execution order for weakness. You see, Musashi wasn't running from people. He was refining perception. He was engineering solitude into structure. He turned isolation into instruction. When he walked away from the noise, he wasn't escaping the world. He was detaching from its control. That's the void I'm talking about. The one most men never enter, because it's quiet there, too quiet. And in that quiet, the truth is loud. Silence will show you who you really are. It will drag your insecurities out of the dark. It will strip you of ego, strip you of identity, strip you of comfort until there's nothing left but what's real. That's why men run from solitude. Because solitude isn't absence, it's confrontation. It's the mirror most men are too afraid to look into. You call it loneliness, but that's only because you've never stayed long enough to turn pain into clarity. You've never trained yourself to sit in silence until it obeys you. Musashi did, and that's why his name outlived kingdoms. He understood the paradox. When you stop chasing noise, you start hearing power. When you master being alone, no one can own you again. Silence is not empty, it's a forge, and inside it, weak men melt, strong men are made. Listen carefully. The world fears the man who doesn't need it. It will call him strange, it will call him distant, but deep down, everyone knows the loner isn't lost, he's just not for sale. Son, the world doesn't fear loud men. It fears quiet ones. The ones who move without posting, build without announcing, and grow without asking permission. Because silence is unpredictable, and unpredictability is power. But the truth is, most men can't handle silence. They need constant stimulation just to feel alive. They reach for their phones before they open their eyes. They scroll before they think. They consume before they create. And then they wonder why their lives feel directionless. It's not boredom they're running from. It's confrontation. Confrontation with themselves. That quiet moment when there's no music, no scrolling, no background noise, that's when the real mirror appears. The one that doesn't show your reflection, it shows your reality. And most men can't stand what they see, so they run back to distraction. They call it balance, they call it relaxation, but it's fear, dressed in comfort.
You see, Every system around you was designed to keep you distracted. Social media feeds, entertainment, dopamine hits, they don't exist by accident. They exist to keep you soft, to keep you predictable. Because a man addicted to comfort is a man easy to control. He doesn't resist, he doesn't rebel, he scrolls, he obeys, he fades. That's the trap most men live in, dependence disguised as connection. They think they're staying informed, staying connected, staying relevant, but they're just staying distracted. A digital leash around their time, their focus, and their willpower. They talk about purpose, but they can't even focus for 10 minutes. They talk about greatness, but they panic when they're alone. And the irony? The more noise you let in, the quieter your inner voice becomes. That's how most men lose themselves, not through defeat, but through distraction. But the loner, he's different. He isn't running from the world, he's just not letting it dictate who he becomes. He disappears not to escape people, but to find himself. Because he understands something the crowd never will. That true strength doesn't grow in company, it grows in isolation. That's where Musashi lived. At 13, he killed a grown man in a duel. At 15, he left his village behind. He walked into mountains, into silence, into years of deliberate exile. No mentors, no audience, no approval. Just repetition, just discipline, just the constant sharpening of his craft until it was an extension of his soul. And from that silence, he became unstoppable. 61 duels, 0 losses. But his real victories weren't on the battlefield. They were in the dark, when he was alone, wrestling his mind, stripping himself of ego, fear, and distraction. Musashi didn't train to win. He trained to master. He understood that silence is the ultimate weapon, because silence exposes everything that weakness hides. That's the difference between the crowd and the disciplined. The crowd fears skillness, the disciplined seek it, because they know that in the quiet, the truth speaks, and it doesn't whisper, it commands. You think you need noise to stay sane. You don't. You need silence to stay sharp. Every man who's ever built something that outlived him, from warriors to inventors to thinkers, had to step away from the crowd long enough to hear his own direction. Solitude isn't loneliness. It's clarity. It's where your mind stops chasing and starts commanding. Where every thought becomes intentional, where every weakness is exposed and refined. But here's the part most men never understand. Silence isn't peaceful, it's painful. The quiet will drag your insecurities into the light. It will show you how much time you've wasted, how many dreams you've buried under excuses, how soft you've become. That's why men avoid it. Because silence doesn't comfort, it corrects. And correction hurts. But the loner, he doesn't run from that pain. He studies it. He submits to it. Because he knows every discomfort is a tool. Every moment of stillness is a chance to take back control. You can't fake solitude. You can fake hard work, you can fake ambition, you can fake confidence, but you can't fake silence. Because silence is honest. It doesn't care who you pretend to be. It only reveals who you actually are. Musashi's life wasn't about swords, it was about control. He controlled his mind, his emotions, his environment. He lived like a ghost among men, detached, focused, impossible to influence. He said, "You must understand that there is more than one path to the top of the mountain. But the loner knows every path still requires the same climb, through isolation, through mastery, through pain. So when you find yourself alone, don't rush to escape it. Don't reach for noise to numb it. Let the silence suffocate your excuses until only discipline remains. Let it remind you that everything real, every legacy, every empire, every name that still echoes through time was built in isolation first. The world wants you comfortable. It wants you distracted. It wants you dependent. But if you want power, real, lasting power, learn to walk alone. Because solitude doesn't break men, it exposes them. And if you can command yourself in silence, you can command the world in chaos. That's the void, son. The forbidden room nobody enters anymore. Because in there are no followers, no likes, no validation, only you and your unfinished self. And if you stay long enough, you realize something terrifying. You were never lonely. You were just undisciplined. In the cave of Rigando, Musashi spoke to no one for months. But in that silence, he heard everything. Rhythm, breath, fear, time. That's where he stopped being a man and became a system. Every morning, before the sun dared to rise, Musashi faced silence like a battlefield. No noise, just breath, blade, and stillness until discipline became instinct. You'll know you're evolving when loneliness stops hurting and starts teaching. The silence that once felt empty begins to sharpen you. You don't train focus by just reading books. You train it by removing everything that dulls it. People, noise, comfort, distraction, until silence becomes your weapon. The man who walks alone is feared not because he's dangerous, but because he's free. A crowd can be controlled. A loner cannot.
Listen, son. Every system you obey reprograms your mind. The question is, who built yours? You wake up to your phone before you wake up to your thoughts. You check who texted, who viewed your story, who liked your post. You've been conditioned to need confirmation before you even breathe. That's not routine. That's programming. And you didn't write that code. The world did. You think you're in control because you can choose your app, your playlist, your breakfast. But real control isn't choosing between distractions. It's choosing to be undistracted. Most men don't even realize they're addicted. Their drug isn't a substance, it's stimulation. Their dealer isn't a man, it's a system. The system that keeps you entertained just enough to stay average. The system that rewards attention, not excellence. The system that keeps your mind busy, but your purpose empty. That's why solitude is the most feared system of all, because it's not built for you. You have to build it yourself. And that's exactly what Miyamoto Musashi did. When Musashi retreated to the Rigando cave in his final years, he wasn't hiding. He was upgrading his operating system. No followers or noise, just stone, silence, and the steady rhythm of his breath echoing through the mountains. He called this phase Seijaku, the discipline of stillness. To the untrained man, silence feels like death. But to the disciplined, silence is a forge. That's where the weak mind is melted down and reforged into a weapon. Musashi lived on rice and water, meditated through pain, and studied the rhythm of nature. Every sunrise became a clock. Every drip of water became a teacher. He watched his instincts like a scientist, rewiring them one thought at a time. It was in that silence he began writing his final doctrine, Dokukodo, the path of aloneness. 21 principles that weren't meant to be read, they were meant to be lived. He didn't write them as philosophy. He wrote them as software, code for mastering the mind. Because once a man programs his solitude, the world loses its grip on him. They weren't rules, they were recalibrations. Musashi didn't just live in solitude, he lived through it. Every principle was a brick in the architecture of mastery. And you, son, you keep calling your boredom depression when it's actually your potential starving. You keep mistaking noise for movement, distraction for destiny. You can't build anything great if your mind belongs to everyone else. Musashi proved that solitude isn't escape, it's alignment. When he entered the Regondo cave, he wasn't disappearing, he was debugging his soul. He created a system where silence was structure, not punishment. And that's what you must build, your own system of solitude. Delete the noise, detach from validation, train in the dark, rebuild your attention span, discipline your dopamine before it disciplines you. Because here's the truth. The brain serves whoever feeds it most, silence or chaos. Feed it noise, and it becomes scattered. Feed it silence, and it becomes sovereign. Musashi chose silence, and the world still echoes his name. So when they ask why you walk alone, why you disappeared, why you've become quieter, don't explain. Just say this. Alone is not lonely. Alone is focus. Listen, Musashi didn't write for applause. He wrote to remember who he was when the world tried to make him forget. He called his words Dokukodo, the way of walking alone. Not a doctrine, not poetry, survival instructions for the man who refuses to kneel. He said, accept everything, just the way it is. That's not surrender, that's sovereignty. Because when you accept, you stop bleeding over what you can't control. You stop arguing with reality, and you start shaping it. Denial is noise. Acceptance is silence. And silence is where control begins. Then he wrote, do not seek pleasure for its own sake. You live in an age where pleasure is packaged, priced, and pushed in your face. They've turned comfort into a drug, and every scroll, every bite, every click is a dose. But Musashi saw it centuries ago. The moment a man chases pleasure, he becomes owned by it. So he trained his mind to eat discipline, to breathe boredom, to crave the edge instead of the cushion. He starved his desires until only purpose remained. That's not a man running from life. That's a man rewriting the code of need. He said, think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. You've been told to believe in yourself, but Musashi understood. The more you think of yourself, the smaller your vision becomes. Ego builds walls where perspective builds bridges. A man obsessed with himself can't see beyond his reflection. But when you think deeply of the world, you understand your role in it, not as its center, but as its servant. That's how legacy is born, when your life stops being about you. He said, be detached from desire your whole life long. In Japanese, mujo, impermanence, is the quiet truth that everything passes. Desire binds you to what fades. Detachment frees you to what endures. He wasn't numb, he was aware. The man who can walk away from anything owns everything. Because when nothing controls you, no one can. And still, the pages kept speaking, not to the weak, but to the willing. He said, do not fear death. Not because he was reckless, but because he understood life's value comes from its fragility. When you stop fearing the end, you start living like every moment is a strike, precise, necessary, final. Fear makes men delay. Awareness makes them act. He lived like time was watching, and it was. He said, do not, under any circumstances, depend on a partial feeling. That means stop waiting for motivation. Stop chasing moods. Feelings lie. Systems don't. He didn't trust emotion. He trusted repetition. And in that trust, he found mastery. That's what solitude gave him, control over his own signal. He said, do not let yourself be guided by the feeling of lust or love, because even beauty can become a chain. He didn't reject love, he refused to be ruled by it. He knew that attachment bends judgment, weakens focus, and breeds fear of loss. He loved through clarity, not dependency. He walked alone not because he lacked connection, but because he had direction. He said, never be jealous. He said, never regret. He said, do not dwell in the past or dream of the future. These weren't moral lines, they were tactical. Jealousy is distraction. Regret is paralysis. Fantasy is escape. A warrior doesn't live in what was or what could be. He stands in what is. Presence is power. Every moment an edge, every breath a strike. He said, respect Buddha and the gods, but do not rely on them, because divinity means nothing without discipline. Faith without effort is self-deception. He believed in walking, one step, one strike, one decision at a time. No prayers for rescue, only responsibility. He said, you may abandon your body, but you must preserve your honor. That's not about reputation, it's about alignment. Honor means doing what your soul knows is right, even when no one sees. It means walking straight when the path turns crooked. He didn't live for approval, he lived for mastery. Each line of Dokokodo wasn't a command, it was a confrontation. He wrote them not for the world, but for the man inside, the one who still wavers, still seeks comfort, still forgets his purpose. They were mirrors he built for himself and for you. So when the noise of the world gets too loud, you remember the sound of silence that built him. Walk alone, not because you must, but because that's where truth waits. Learn to eat stillness until your mind stops starving for validation.
The world fears the man who walks alone because it can't buy him, can't break him, can't bend him. He doesn't need applause to know his worth. He doesn't need company to know his direction. Musashi didn't master solitude. He became solitude. And that's why centuries later, his name still cuts through time. A legend. Every legend you remember paid for his silence in loneliness. And every man who feared solitude was forgotten.
Listen, son. You want to be remembered, but you don't want to disappear first. You want mastery without sacrifice. You want peace without silence. But Musashi understood something the world still denies. Greatness demands debt. And the payment isn't in money, it's in isolation. He called it daika, the cost. The world tells you there's a shortcut. It tells you that balance is the secret. But balance is a word for people afraid to fall. Musashi didn't balance, he burned. He walked away from comfort, from warmth, from applause. He traded everything soft for something sharp. And that's why his name still echoes, not because he won duels, but because he won himself. He spent his last years in the cave of Regondo, a dark hollow in the mountain where wind was his only conversation. No family, no students, just ink, steel, and silence. He wasn't meditating, he was refining. Every movement, every thought, every emotion cut down to its purest form. He wrote, "Do nothing that is of no use." You can't do that in a world that feeds you noise. You can't hear your own conviction when you're addicted to feedback. The reason most men never master anything is because they never disappear long enough to pay the cost. They start something, and when it gets quiet, they panic. They need validation, applause, company. They need someone to remind them they exist. But Musashi didn't need reminders. He was his own witness. You say you want to become unstoppable? Then learn to be unseen. Learn to grind without announcement. Learn to sharpen in silence. Because the moment you choose this path, you will lose people. The same way Musashi lost warmth. Your friends will call you distant. Your lovers will call you cold. The world will say you changed. And you will. That's the point. He once wrote, "Resentment and complaint are neither appropriate for oneself nor others." He didn't waste emotion explaining himself. He didn't justify solitude to those who feared it. He just walked. Imagine him sitting at dawn, his sword beside him, his reflection on still water. Not chasing glory, chasing precision. That's the image of mastery. Not crowds, not cameras, not noise, just clarity. Every strike he practiced alone became a principle. Every principle became a way. Every way became a legend. But the world never sees the cave. It only sees the sword. That's the lie of modern greatness. You see the results, not the price tag. You see the man at the top, not the man who buried himself for 10 years to climb. You envy his peace, not his scars. You quote his wisdom, but you don't want his silence. Musashi said, "Never stray from the way." The way, dokokudo, the path of walking alone. And every step forward demanded something he couldn't get back. He refused fame. He refused marriage. He refused comfort. Because he knew, once comfort touches you, it starts to own you. He didn't hate the world, he just didn't belong to it anymore. And that's the cost of becoming your own system. You become untouchable, but you also become misunderstood. Modern men fear that.
They crave understanding more than purpose. They'd rather be accepted than complete. They'd rather be liked than great. But Musashi didn't chase understanding, he chased truth. And truth is a lonely currency. You say you want peace? Then prepare to lose pleasure. You say you want focus? Then prepare to lose company. You say you want power? Then prepare to lose comfort. That's the cost. That's daika. And the silence that remains, that's where transformation begins.
Listen, son. You want to be remembered, but you don't want to disappear first. You want mastery without sacrifice. You want peace without silence. But Musashi understood something the world still denies. Greatness demands debt. And the payment isn't in money, it's in isolation. He called it daika, the cost. The world tells you there's a shortcut. It tells you that balance is the secret. But balance is a word for people afraid to fall. Musashi didn't balance, he burned. He walked away from comfort, from warmth, from applause. He traded everything soft for something sharp. And that's why his name still echoes. Not because he won duels, but because he won himself. He spent his last years in the cave of Regondo, a dark hollow in the mountain, where wind was his only conversation. No family, no students, just ink, steel, and silence. He wasn't meditating, he was refining. Every movement, every thought, every emotion cut down to its purest form. He wrote, "Do nothing that is of no use." You can't do that in a world that feeds you noise. You can't hear your own conviction when you're addicted to feedback. The reason most men never master anything is because they never disappear long enough to pay the cost. They start something, and when it gets quiet, they panic. They need validation, applause, company. They need someone to remind them they exist. But Musashi didn't need reminders. He was his own witness. You say you want to become unstoppable? Then learn to be unseen. Learn to grind without announcement. Learn to sharpen in silence. Because the moment you choose this path, you will lose people, the same way Musashi lost warmth. Your friends will call you distant. Your lovers will call you cold. The world will say you changed. And you will. That's the point. He once wrote, "Resentment and complaint are appropriate neither for oneself nor others." He didn't waste emotion explaining himself. He didn't justify solitude to those who feared it. He just walked. Imagine him sitting at dawn, his sword beside him, his reflection on still water. Not chasing glory, chasing precision. That's the image of mastery. Not crowds, not cameras, not noise, just clarity. Every strike he practiced alone became a principle. Every principle became a way. Every way became a legend. But the world never sees the cave. It only sees the sword. That's the lie of modern greatness. You see the results, not the price tag. You see the man at the top, not the man who buried himself for 10 years to climb. You envy his peace, not his scars. You quote his wisdom, but you don't want his silence. Musashi said, "Never stray from the way." The way, dokokudo, the path of walking alone. And every step forward demanded something he couldn't get back. He refused fame.
He refused marriage. He refused comfort. Because he knew once comfort touches you, it starts to own you. He didn't hate the world. He just didn't belong to it anymore. And that's the cost of becoming your own system. You become untouchable, but you also become misunderstood. Modern men fear that. They crave understanding more than purpose. They'd rather be accepted than complete. They'd rather be liked than great. He once wrote, "It may seem difficult at first, but everything is difficult at first." So stop flinching. Stop expecting ease. You're not supposed to feel ready. You're supposed to endure. Musashi didn't find peace in the cave. He forged it. He didn't escape the world. He outgrew it. And that's the part no one tells you. Solitude is not the absence of love. It's the presence of purpose. In the end, when death approached him in that cave, he didn't cry, he didn't beg, he didn't regret. He simply placed his sword beside him, closed his eyes, and waited. Not as a warrior, not as a writer, but as a man who paid his price in full. That's legacy. That's peace. That's Daika. Every man sacrifices something. The difference is what he gets in return. And Musashi, he got eternity. There's a point where a man stops chasing control because he is control. You merge solitude and discipline into transformation. Musashi's final years become metaphor, his sword never drawn in anger, his will unshakable. He had become his own order. You explain the ultimate power of the loner isn't isolation, it's sovereignty. When your emotions, your habits, your thoughts obey you without struggle. You call it the state of Fudoshin, unmovable mind. This is where distraction dies, where discipline becomes instinct, where peace feels like war to the undisciplined. You end with the strike line. Listen, son, the world doesn't remember the balanced, it remembers the obsessed. Balance builds comfort, obsession builds kings. Because whether you admit it or not, you've been trained. Every ping, every scroll, every conversation that leads to nowhere, it's conditioning you. Modern life has turned your attention into currency, and you keep spending it like it's infinite. You wake up and the first thing you touch isn't purpose, it's your phone. You scroll not because you care, but because you're scared of silence. You're not looking for meaning, you're looking for noise to drown the absence of it. You call it staying connected, but it's not connection, it's dependency. And dependency is just a prettier word for slavery.
When you start to cut the noise, you'll shake. When you delete your social apps, you'll feel forgotten. When you sit alone for the first time, you'll feel empty. Good. That's the system resetting. Because your brain serves whoever feeds it most. Musashi's solitude wasn't just isolation, it was optimization. He created rules that governed his mind like a weapon. He realized that every distraction costs awareness, and every ounce of awareness shapes precision. That's why he could walk into battle calm, detached, unshaken, not because he was fearless, but because he had nothing left to lose within himself. You say you want focus? Then earn it. Stop seeking validation. Stop explaining your grind to people who will never understand it. Stop waiting for motivation to show up. It doesn't exist.
Sit with yourself until the silence stops screaming. Train until repetition feels like prayer. Detach until comfort feels foreign. That's solitude, that's the system. The man who stops replying for validation and starts replying with purpose, that man is learning control. The athlete who trains in the dark, who hears nothing but his breath and the wheat hitting the floor, that man is learning mastery. The creative who detaches from trends and builds timeless craft, that man is learning legacy. Because solitude doesn't make you less, it makes you real. Every moment alone is an audit of your character. It reveals what you actually believe when no one's watching. Musashi didn't emerge from Regendo with followers. He emerged with clarity. His solitude built a mind that no chaos could bend. A system that ran on self-command. And that's the system you're trying to build now. Not a perfect life, a controlled one. Not a noise-free world, a noise-proof mind. So strip away what distracts. Embrace what remains. Because what remains is what's true. Listen carefully. You've been taught that war is something outside you, against rivals, against systems, against time. But Musashi knew better. The greatest battle is internal. The field is your mind. The enemy is your weakness. And silence is the battleground. Every man faces this war, but few survive it. Not because they lack strength, but because they fear the quiet where strength is forged. The world tells you to chase attention, to accumulate desires, to seek validation, to get comfortable. Those are the four enemies of the loner: distraction, desire, validation, comfort. They look harmless, they sound human, but each one eats discipline like rust eats steel. The first enemy, distraction. Distraction is the modern man's sword, but it cuts only him. Every ping, every scroll, every conversation that wastes your time is a slice across your own focus. You think you're multitasking, but you're just dividing your will into fragments. When your attention is scattered, your power is shared. When your attention is controlled, your power multiplies. That's why Musashi trained alone. He didn't need an audience. He didn't need the crowd's noise to prove he was real. In his world, silence wasn't peace, it was a weapon. He used it to hunt weakness. He knew if you can't sit alone for an hour, you'll never stand alone in a lifetime. Control your attention, and no one can control you.
The second enemy, desire. Desire clouds direction. You want everything, and that's why you move toward nothing. Musashi's Dokodo says, be detached from desire your whole life long. Not because pleasure is evil, but because pleasure untrained becomes prison. The man who needs nothing can never be manipulated. Look around you. Everyone is chasing something. Approval, money, escape. Their energy burns wide, not deep. But the focused man burns through walls. He cuts every craving that doesn't serve his path. He doesn't react to impulse. He studies it. He doesn't chase mood. He commands it.
Every time you resist an urge, you sharpen the blade. That's how a loner builds precision. The third enemy, validation. The loner understands this poison better than anyone. The crowd wants you visible, predictable, obedient. They call it networking, but it's worship. You start performing instead of progressing. You start measuring yourself by noise instead of impact. Musashi refused to serve under any lord. He refused titles, wealth, and fame. When others dueled for glory, he used a wooden sword, bukto, not to humiliate, but to master restraint. He wasn't testing his strength, he was testing his control over it. A man who needs applause is a servant. A man who can build in silence, he's already free. The fourth enemy, comfort. Comfort is the slowest death. It doesn't stab, it seduces. It tells you to rest one more hour, to skip one more repetition, to take one more easy path. Then years pass, and your edge dulls quietly. Musashi slept under bridges. He ate what he could find. He trained in storms, practiced in caves, and lived in discomfort until it became familiar. He understood routine breeds strength, comfort breeds decay. And the loner knows this. Every minute of discipline builds invisible dominance. The man who can make pain his ally will always outlast the one who fears it. You think you need motivation. You don't. You need systems, rituals that outlive emotion. Discipline doesn't ask how you feel, it asks what you've built. So you create routines that remove thought. Wake early, work deeply, move with purpose. Observe yourself like an opponent. Cut weakness before it grows roots. This is how obsession becomes armor. This is how solitude becomes strength. When you repeat the same motion long enough, it stops being repetition. It becomes instinct. When you train your emotions to obey logic, chaos can't reach you. You become composed under pressure, silent under stress, ruthless under doubt. That's what Musashi achieved. Stillness wasn't his retreat, it was his dominance. He didn't conquer men, he conquered reaction. That's why he could stand before death and feel nothing but readiness. You want to build power? Then stop leaking it. Cut distractions until focus hurts. Starve desires until purpose feels pure. Reject validation until silence feels full. Crush comfort until pain feels like home. Because every act of control builds something no one sees. Invisible muscle, invisible order, invisible command. And one day, it becomes who you are. Not what you do, who you are. That's when the war within ends. Not with noise, not with celebration, just quiet victory. Obsession isn't chaos. It's the highest form of order. Every legend you remember paid for his silence in loneliness. Listen, son. The world shows you glory, the medals, the praise, the spotlight, but it hides what it takes to stand there. It hides the blood, the silence, the years when no one cared you existed.
Musashi understood that early. He walked away from the noise, from fame, from disciples, from comfort, and entered a cave, alone, old, waiting for death, not because he was broken, but because the path demanded it. He didn't die surrounded by wealth or followers. He died surrounded by stillness. And in that stillness, he wrote the Book of 5 Rings. Not to be admired, but to leave behind the truth. A truth most men can't live with. That mastery requires disappearance. You want to be powerful? Then understand this. Solitude has a price. You will lose comfort first. You will lose people next. Then you will lose recognition. And if you keep going, you'll even lose the version of yourself that needed any of those things. That's not failure. That's the purification of purpose. When the world says you've changed, it's usually because you've stopped entertaining weakness. When they say you're cold, it's because your focus makes them uncomfortable. When they call you distant, it's because you no longer move at their pace. That's the cost, and you pay it in silence. Musashi wrote, "You can only fight the way you practice." But what he didn't write, what he lived, is that you can only endure the way you suffer. He slept under bridges, ate whatever nature allowed, and kept walking, because his mission was bigger than his mood. Every man who becomes something must first become nothing. Pain isn't punishment, it's tuition. Every sleepless night, every misunderstanding, every goodbye you didn't want to say, it all adds up to power. Because the man who no longer fears pain has already defeated half the world. The loner becomes invisible before he becomes unforgettable. That's the order. First, they forget your name. Then, they repeat your principles. And when the silence starts to suffocate you, remember this. You're not being buried. You're being built. So the next time someone tells you you're too focused, too hard, too detached, don't defend it. Smile, because it means you're paying the right price. Every path to power begins with isolation and ends with peace. The crowd may win attention, but the disciplined man wins time. And time, son, is the only true wealth. They mocked you for being silent. They called you distant, cold, arrogant. But the truth is, they feared you. Because nothing terrifies the ordinary more than a man who no longer needs their noise.
Listen, son. Every step you've taken till now has burned something away. Comfort, weakness, dependence, distraction. You've learned that power isn't in being loud. Power is in control. The control to move when needed and to be still when others panic. That's where Musashi reached before death. Shoka, ascension. The point where silence is no longer a cage but a throne. He wasn't running from the world anymore. He was ruling it, quietly, completely, without needing to touch. There's a level of stillness most men will never reach because it demands you give up everything that made you feel alive. The phone, the noise, the validation,
the constant rush to be seen. You gave all that up, and for a while you felt like you were dying. But what died wasn't you. It was the version of you that needed to be noticed. That's the rebirth. The moment when solitude stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like power. When silence doesn't remind you of what you lost, it reminds you of what you've become. Musashi once wrote, "From one thing, know 10,000 things." He meant that mastery of the self is mastery of all. Once you can control your own mind, you can see through the world like glass. You no longer fight distractions. You're no longer moved by praise. You don't chase approval, because you've seen what lies beyond it: clarity. Stillness has become your final form of strength. You don't speak to prove, you speak to move. You don't act to impress, you act to conquer. Every decision is deliberate, every silence is strategic. This is what the world calls mysterious. But it's not mystery, it's mastery. Remember what I told you. Solitude was training, discipline was structure, pain was tuition. Now all of it fuses into presence. You've stopped becoming. You've arrived. The man who walks alone no longer begs for direction. He is the direction. He carries his silence like a weapon, his focus like armor, his patience like fire. And here's the paradox. Once you master detachment, the world starts chasing your attention. Because men who don't need anything are the only ones worth following. Musashi didn't have followers while he lived, but centuries later, men still whisper his name. That's the kind of silence you build, one that outlives sound. Power isn't in domination, it's in discipline. And discipline is not control over others, it's control over impulse. When the world shouts, you don't flinch. When temptation whispers, you don't move. You've built a fortress inside yourself, and the gates never open for weakness. That's why the world bends for you now, because it can't break you anymore. The loner becomes legend the moment he realizes solitude was never punishment, it was preparation. When Musashi died, he didn't fall. He sat upright, sword in hand, calm, unafraid. He left this world the same way he lived in it, unmoved. That's the image you hold now. Not of a warrior with blood on his hands, but a man who mastered himself so completely that even death had to wait. This is where you stand now, the end of noise, the birth of clarity. You don't seek control anymore. You are control. You don't chase meaning. You radiate it. You've outgrown chaos, and chaos knows it.
Remember this: solitude creates vision, discipline preserves it, and clarity commands the world. This is the state Musashi reached, and it's the one you're standing in now. No longer reaching, no longer begging, no longer proving. You've become the thing the world can't distract, can't tempt, can't own. That's what it means to walk alone. That's what it means to ascend. Listen, what you hear right now, this silence, it's not empty, it's you. For the first time, it's just you. No notifications, No noise, no names to prove, no faces to impress. Just you and the weight of what you've built. This is the quiet every man fears, because it's the moment where there's nowhere left to hide. No distraction, no comfort, no escape. Only the truth you've been avoiding, staring back. But that truth, that stillness is your final weapon, because the man who can stand in silence can stand anywhere. This is what Musashi called seishin, the quiet mind, the mind that doesn't react, it responds. It doesn't chase, it chooses. It doesn't depend, it decides. You've reached the point where discipline is no longer an act, it's identity. Where solitude is no longer suffering, it's sovereignty. You've crossed the line where fear turns into focus, where noise fades into nothing. And now, the same world that ignored you will study your silence, because true power doesn't announce itself. It just stands there, unshaken. Pause. So walk, not with hurry, not with hunger. Walk like a man who already owns the ground beneath his feet. Because from this point forward, you don't chase greatness, you carry it. And when they ask how you did it, tell them you didn't. Tell them you became it. The loner becomes legend. The silence becomes strength. And the man who needs nothing commands everything.